the weight of different nations and different regions in the world have changed in the last many decades. And a lot of that derives from globalization. Some of it is autonomous of globalization. And so when you think today of which are the crucial regions, which are the important countries, rebalancing tells you that they're not the same, or not the same to the same extent as before. As rebalancing advances, I would pick a third concept, multipolarity, which is that some nations and maybe some groupings have acquired that they're regarded in the international system as one of the poles, and the number of poles from an era 75 years ago where we thought in binary terms of the US and the USSR, or the West and the East. Today you actually have more independent or autonomous centers of decision making. So the more rebalancing carries on, the more we are going to see the emergence of multipolarity. So the flow in that sense would be, the deeper that globalization gets, the more you're going to see rebalancing. The more rebalancing you get, the more you're going to see the emergence of multipolarity. But having said all this, it's also true that there are the constant practices and traditions of international relations that remain at work. International relations are still primarily defined by the nation state, by competition and collaboration among nation states, by convergences among them. So while we often tend to talk about the changes, and rightly tend to talk about the changes in the world, I think it's important, particularly for practitioners of not just diplomacy, of anybody who has anything to do in the world, to remind themselves that while the world changes, there are constant factors at work. There are sometimes historical factors at work. So my description today for the state of the world, for all the advancements of economy, of technology, the progress we see even of connectivity, that about 3 decades ago, the world was described, not literally, as a time of the end of history. I think today we are seeing a time of the return of history. Return of history in the sense of countries and regions which were relatively more dormant or less able, less capable, now actually seeking out more space, offering more capabilities, exercising more influence, taking on more responsibilities. So it is definitely a very different world. It's also different because both the past and the future is equally embedded in the present. Now, if we were to speak about the return of history in this part of the world, I think a very natural example of that is India-UAE relationship. Because if you look at our ties, in fact, are ties which are defined by the monsoon, by the most basic forms of mobility when people waited for wind behind their back to take them to where they wanted to do business. And it isn't just that we have a tradition. In that tradition, there are actually centuries of comfort. That if you look at the ability of India and the UAE the effort is not just intrinsic, it's often intuitive. There are a lot of things we don't need to say. There are times when we may occasionally have a different perspective. Even that is often expressed quite subtly between us. So when I look at the return of history and the relationships which will go forward in the coming days, I certainly would rank the India-UAE relationship very high in that. And there are many reasons. I think the two very obvious ones are one, of course, the UAE is today India's third largest trade partner. It is our second largest export market. And the second, that more Indian citizens live in UAE than in any other country abroad. So whether we are talking people or whether we are talking business, this country has a particular salience in our perspectives. Now, what has been the change in this relationship? I think we have seen on the bilateral side, actually, especially after Prime Minister Modi's visit in 2015, a visit which took place after more than 4 decades at that level, we've actually seen a veritable transformation in our ties. As I pointed out, certainly our trade and investment has gone up. But if I were again to pick a defining moment or a defining decision of that change, it would be the SICA. The fact that we were able to conclude a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement so quickly and has led to such effective results thereafter, I think speaks really volumes for the relationship. And we are now moving into new areas. Today, our discussions are about space, it's about education, it's about artificial intelligence, it's about health, it's about startups. So again, the traditional energy, trade, investments, those continue. But a new agenda is also coming into being, and to my mind, that is something that would really redefine this relationship and help it go to a higher orbit. The second aspect of this relationship today is our ability and our effort at actually expanding it to other partners with whom we have mutual comfort. Right now, to me, the obvious example of that is France. We have just this year taken our trilateral with France to a ministerial level. We certainly want to expand that. But we're also, India and UAE, doing more things together in other geographies. Africa is an example. We together have are exploring the possibility of health cooperation in Africa. And then, if I were to sort of go a little bit broader in the canvas, I would cite to you the establishment of the I2U2 mechanism between India, Israel, UAE, and the United States as yet another example of how our changed relationship, India and UAE, is now beginning to have a broader ripple impact. The fact that it is fitting into actually transformations which are independently underway in this region and often helping to take the direction of that transformation forward. So the picture I see today of India and UAE is really of two countries, very comfortable, who've known each other a long time, but who have rediscovered, in a sense, the relationship in the last decade, and who want to use the relationship today in a changing world, not just to survive in a changing world, but to shape a changing world. So it is in many ways a very ambitious relationship because it's not limited really by its bilateral possibilities. It's certainly today having a regional impact, but I'm very confident that as we get deeper into the relationship, it will also make itself felt at the global level. So once again, I want to say I'm really delighted to be with all of you this morning. I wanted to set a tone, not because everybody wants to necessarily start a conference optimistically, they should, But I wanted to set a tone because as someone who, along with Dr. Anwar, we have been witnesses to this transformation of this relationship from inside the room. So I want to share with you that confidence, that sense of confidence inside the room about where this relationship is going. And I hope that at the rest of the conference, you will be able to build on that sentiment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaishankar. Don't go too far away. I'll have you back up here on the stage in just a moment. You spoke there about the partnership and the many different connections between India and the UAE, including the comprehensive economic partnership that covers everything from bilateral business opportunities to how the two nations can partner for global impact on critical regional